Birkenau concentration camp, 1944 to 1945. Chapter 16. The train arrived at Birkenau at night. The cars clanked and groaned as the train came to a stop half a kilometer outside the gates. It was a cloudy night and should have been dark, but the sky was lit up like a red bonfire. Black chimneys stood up in silhouette against the glowing sky, shooting flames from their tops, and the smell of burning flesh filled the air. I gagged. I waited for the train to move again, to take us into that awful factory, but we didn't move. We sat for what must have been hours, all of us who could see out watching the flames, knowing that was where we were going. Why were they holding us here? Was this one last torture, one last joke? Did they want to drive us to panic, to madness? If they did, it was working. The longer we waited, the more anxious I got. What was going on? Why weren't we moving? What are they waiting for? I said at last, my voice hoarse from thirst and fear. Don't you see the fires in the chimneys? The man next to me said. They have to finish off the last train load before they have room for us. I took in his words, too weak to react. We were just another raw material waiting to be processed. Shovel us in, shovel us out. I dozed again, and every time I woke, I was still in the cold train car, a dead man leaning against me. At last, the train jolted and began to move, and I woke for good to a pale yellow sun rising above the trees in the distance. They were taking us inside to the furnaces. They were taking us inside to die. The train car door opened, and for a few steps, the dead body next to me came with us, held up between the living as we pushed for the door. But soon there was more space, and he fell, slumped to the floor with the others who had died on the trip. There were dozens of them, rag and bone skeletons who had perished out of hunger or thirst or the cold or suffocation or overwork. We climbed over them, gulping in the fresh air outside before the capos and soldiers whipped us and shouted at us to line up. We assembled in a field just beyond the train cars, those of us who survived, looking more dead than alive. Another roll call to see which of us were still alive. The Nazis marched us toward one of the big brick buildings with the chimneys. So this is it. The reality began to sink in, and I slumped under its weight. They really were going to kill us. I had come so far, endured so much agony and suffering. I had survived the work gangs in the ghetto, baked bread under cover of night, hidden in a pigeon coop, had a midnight bar mitzvah in the basement of an abandoned building. I'd watched my parents be taken away to their deaths, and avoided Eamon Goeth and his dogs, who had survived the salt mines of Waisleka and the sick games of Zerbinia. I had done so much to live, and now here the Nazis were going to take all that away with their furnace. I started to cry, the first tears that I had shed since Moshe had died. Why had I worked so hard to survive if it was always going to end like this? If I had known, I wouldn't have bothered. I would have let them kill me back in the ghetto. It would have been easier that way. All that I had done was for nothing. In a large, empty room, we were ordered to undress and pile our striped uniforms in a corner. In a different corner was another sack of clothes, silks of bright red and blue and purple and green, gypsy clothes. Now we knew who had fed the fires of Birkenau while we waited our turn outside. I was still crying as I pulled my shirt off and added it to the pile. The tears came unbidden, but I didn't try to stop them. Some of the other men were crying. Most weren't. I didn't care. I was tired of fighting, tired of being brave, tired of surviving. They whipped us and beat us again to herd us into the next room, where shower heads lined the ceiling. I remembered what the man on the train had said, that you died fastest if you stood underneath one of the shower heads where the gas came out. Instead, I moved away from them, near one of the stone columns set throughout the room. They packed us in again, just like on the train, but there was still a little room to move. When the door clanked shut, some of the men cried out. By now, we all knew why we were here and what they were going to do to us. Some people panicked and beat on the door, yelling for the Nazis to let us out, to have mercy, to spare us. Some people cursed them. Some people closed their eyes and muttered prayers. Some just stared off into space waiting to die. Tears streamed down my face, tears I didn't even know I had left, and I slid down the column to the ground, burying my head in my hands. Mother, father, my aunts and uncles, my cousins, my friends in Krakow, I missed them all so much. We waited, but no gas came. The cries of men grew louder and more desperate. I stayed frozen to where I sat, not knowing what to think. Why were they waiting now? Maybe someone was standing on the hose, I thought crazily, and I started to giggle. Yes, that was it. Or maybe they couldn't get the fire for the furnace going. Maybe the match kept blowing out, or the kindling couldn't catch fire. I laughed out loud at that, and a prisoner standing over me looked down at me like I was insane. Maybe I was. The Nazis had finally broken me, and it was all a big joke. I could see that now. There was no rhyme or reason to whether we lived or died. One day it might be the man next to you at roll call who is torn apart by dogs. The next day it might be you who is shot through the head. You could play the game perfectly and still lose, so why bother playing at all? Still, the gas didn't come. I pulled myself to my feet and pushed my way through the men until I was standing right underneath one of the shower heads. Go on, I yelled at the shower head. Go on, do it, I dare you. I laughed again. What are you waiting for? I cried. Kill me, I give up. You win. The pipes rattled and moaned. Something was finally coming out, and the men in the room got quiet, like we were all holding our breaths, and I reached my arms up toward the ceiling. Kill me, I prayed. Please kill me and put an end to this. I'm ready. Water rained down on me, freezing water so cold it made me scream. Water, not gas. I was going to live. I laughed and cried, and so did the other men. We celebrated as we shivered, hugging one another and shaking hands, all of us granted a last-minute reprieve by the Nazis. I was alive. Chapter 17. After the shower, nothing seemed to matter as much to me. I knew it was a game to the Nazis. Kill us, don't kill us. To them, it didn't really matter. But even so, I was glad I had made it through. I had been ready to die. But when water came out of those showers, not gas, it was like I was born again. I had survived, and I would keep surviving. I was alive. The Nazis lined us up, still naked and shivering. First, they shaved our heads. With our hair gone, we all looked alike, young and old. Next, they marched us to a different room where the soldiers waited at tables with what looked like big, oversized pencils with wires attached to them. As we worked our way toward them, person after person, I could hear screams of pain ahead of us. I had no idea what they were doing to us, but they weren't killing us. That was all that mattered, I told myself. I could handle pain. By the time I got to the head of the line, I understood what was happening. We were being tattooed. I watched as the man ahead of me had letters and numbers carved into his skin in black ink with an electric needle. When it was my turn, the Nazi with the tattoo pencil grabbed my arm and started to write. The pain was awful as he dragged the vibrating needle over my skin, but I knew better than to cry out or beg him to stop. Besides, nothing could be worse than what had already happened to me. I had been in a gas chamber. I had looked up into a shower head and waited for death to come, and it had passed me by. I was alive. A tattoo was nothing to me, not in that moment. B-3087. That's what the Nazis carved into my skin. B for Birkenau. 3087 for my prisoner number. That was the mark they put on me, a mark I would have for as long as I lived. B-3087. That was who I was to them, not Yanek Gruner, son of Oscar and Mina, not Yanek Gruner of 20 Krakusa Street, Pogorza, Krakow, not Yanek Gruner who loved books and science and American movies. I was prisoner B-3087, but I was alive. After the room where we were tattooed, we were taken to another room with a huge pile of old, used prisoner uniforms and told to find something that fit. The soldiers made us run, beating us with clubs if we took too long to find new pants and a shirt. So we took whatever we could as fast as we could. I ended up with pants that were too short and a shirt that was too big, but I was lucky to get a pair of wooden shoes that fit. That was important. Shoes were everything in the camps. I moved fast and wasn't beaten. I could play the game as well as anybody. I had made it this far, hadn't I? I was alive. When we were showered and tattooed and dressed again, we were taken out to our new barracks. They were worse than any barracks I had seen yet. The ground at Birkenau was like a swamp, wet and thick with mud, and there were no floors in the barracks. There was no heat or electric light either. The bunks weren't beds, but shelves, really, stacked three tall on top of one another, and they stuffed us in again as they had on the trains. There were no mattresses, no pillows, no blankets, just old wet straw when there was anything at all. There were so many of us that we could only all lie in one direction or we couldn't lie down at all. It didn't matter. I was alive. I couldn't help thinking it over and over again. I felt something at my feet, deep inside the shelf, and I reached down to get it. It was a scrap of colorful cloth, a bandana or a handkerchief, probably left there by one of the gypsies who'd slept in these bunks before us. I tucked the scrap up under my head, hoping to use it as a bit of a pillow against my ear, but there was something hard inside it. I unknotted the cloth and I found an object hidden within, a little wooden horse. It was a simple children's toy, a rough carving that just hinted at four legs and a head, but it was smooth and dark like it had been played with. Some gypsy boy or girl had loved this horse, had somehow kept it with them always, right up until the very end. Had they known they were going to die? Had they left their little horse behind so it wouldn't die with them? So some part of them might survive and be remembered? We have a boy who is 13 today, a man on my shelf said. I raised my head, as did one or two others. Who will stand with him? No one stirred. And there, not 10 men here who will make a minion with us? Be quiet, someone told him. Go to sleep. How can you care about such things in a place like this? Someone else asked. It is even more important here and now, the man said. Someone scoffed. Tomorrow he'll be dead. We all will. None of it matters anymore. I was tired and starving, and my arm burned from the tattoo. But suddenly I thought standing in a minion for somebody's bar mitzvah was the most important thing in the world, worth losing sleep over, worth being punished or killed. I'll do it, I said, and the men around me were quiet for a minute after I spoke. And then someone else said yes, and another, and another. When there were 10 of us, we climbed down onto the muddy floor, and the man who had first spoken began to pray. More men came down then, more than 10, until we filled the whole ground. The boy looked so young, but I knew I was only 1 or 2 years older than he was. And with a start, I realized I had probably missed my own birthday. I was 15 now, maybe even 16. It was winter, but I had no idea what month it was, let alone what day. I had been in concentration camps for more than 2 years. I looked at the boy and I remembered my own hasty bar mitzvah in Krakow. I had been so young then, a lifetime ago. The ceremony was fast so we wouldn't be caught. And when it was over, all the men whispered Mazel Tov, and we climbed back onto our shelves. I went up to the boy and I pressed the wooden horse into his hands, the only present I could give him. The boy looked at me with big, round eyes. Had I ever been so young? We are alive, I told him. We are alive, and that is all that matters. We cannot let them tear us from the pages of this world. I said it as much for me as for him, and I said it in memory of Uncle Moshe and my mother and father, my aunts and other uncles and cousins. The Nazi had put me in a gas chamber. I had thought I was dead, but I was alive. I was a new man that day, just like the bar mitzvah boy. I was a new man, and I was going to survive. Chapter 18. I stood at the water pump, scrubbing my body. It was bitterly cold, but I didn't care. I would scrub my body, I decided, each and every morning, no matter how cold it was, no matter how tired I was. I was alive, and I meant to stay that way. We had no soap, but at least I was able to wash away the caking dirt of Birkenau. I paid careful attention to where I had been tattooed. Too many others had let their tattoos get infected, and that had taken them to the camp surgeon. You didn't want to go to the camp surgeon, ever. I even rubbed my teeth with my wet fingers. I had no toothbrushes or toothpaste, of course, but it felt important to remember what it was to feel like to be human. As I scrubbed the taint of Birkenau from my body, I read the signs that the Nazis had posted above the water pump. The block is your home. Maintain cleanliness. And one louse equals your death. Big jokers, the Nazis. You could play by the rules, keep yourself clean, do everything right, and still the Nazis would kill you for looking at them wrong. but I played the game. I worked at Birkenau. Work at Birkenau was as bad as everywhere else. Here, as in Plazau, we were to build new barracks. The ground for the new section was so big it would double the size of the camp when it was finished. The Nazis called the new camp B-3, but we prisoners called it Mexico. I don't know where the name started, but Mexico always sounded exotic to me. Warm and sunny, with beaches and laughing faces. Maybe that's why the prisoners nicknamed it Mexico, to make them think of something very different from what B-3 really was. The camp storehouse, where the Nazis kept all the valuables the Jews from the towns and villages brought with them when they first arrived, we called Canada. Food was weak coffee substitute in the morning, watery soup at lunch, and bread at night. The bread was hard and tasteless and had to serve as breakfast as well. The soup was tepid, and you were lucky if there was a limp potato floating in it. I learned a trick with the soup, which was to wait a while before lining up for it. The heavier parts of the soup sank to the bottom. If you were among the last in line, your soup was thicker. I almost always got some chunk in my soup by holding back until the end. Just that little bit of extra food might keep me from becoming a Mussulman. We were forbidden to go out at night, so instead of the camp latrines, we had to use a barrel in the barrack if we had to go to the bathroom. There were 2 barrels for 500 people, so we learned to go to the latrines during the day as much as we could. There was 1 latrine per prison block, really just a row of holes cut into boards that sat over a cesspit. Prisoners stood guard at the doors with clocks. Their job was to make sure that no prisoner spent more than 2 minutes in the latrine. If you took longer than that, an SS guard would go in and beat you with a club until you left. There was no dawdling at Birkenau. The joke was on the Germans this time, though. By leaving the same prisoners stationed at the latrine, the one place we all had to go throughout the day, they gave us a secret postman. The Nazis never wanted us to talk to one another, but if ever you had a message for someone else, you could whisper it to the prisoner on watch at the latrine door as you went in. He would remember it and quietly whisper it to the recipient when he came to take care of his business later that day. One day, as I went into the latrine with another prisoner, I heard the watchman whisper, "Tonight." I didn't know what that message meant, but it wasn't for me anyway. That night, I was fast asleep on my shelf, slotted in with all the other prisoners in my barracks, when shouts startled me out of my sleep. Capos and SS guards were in the barracks, yelling at us to get up and smacking at prisoners with their clubs. I blinked, disoriented and scared, but I managed to tumble off of my shelf. This was something new for Birkenau, where usually they let us sleep through the night. We quickly assembled in the yard, standing in rows, and I could tell immediately that something was wrong. The floodlights in the towers weren't sliding lazily over the grounds like usual. They were turned outside, where they swept the woods quickly, back and forth. Guard dogs barked beyond the barbed wire fence surrounding the camp, and cars and tanks rolled by outside. "Prison break," a man next to me whispered. "A prison break? Who? How?" My heart thumped in my chest. I wished I was with them, whoever they were, running for the forest, the hills, anywhere but here. "Get out," I prayed for them. "Get away. Fly." A Nazi came around, checking our numbers against a clipboard. There were always prisoners who couldn't get out of bed again, who had become Musselmanners. That's what the Nazis wanted, anyway, to kill us with work and starvation. But which of the missing prisoners were lying back in the barracks, and which of them were out running free in the woods? The Nazi grabbed my hand and read the number on my arm, and then moved on to the next prisoner. My wrist still hurt where he grabbed me. His grip was so tight. The Nazis were mad. Prisoners weren't supposed to stand up for themselves. Prisoners weren't supposed to escape. Will they make it out? Where will they go if they do? Could I escape from Birkenau too, I wondered? Could I live in the woods, eating berries and nuts, sleeping out in the cold? It couldn't be any worse than the camps, and maybe not every Pole was like the awful boys throwing snowballs at the train station. Maybe some sympathetic Pole would take me in, hide me in their barn. We stood for hours, late into the night. They even went through the roll call again, as though some of us might have slipped off in between, which didn't seem possible. Then, almost at dawn, there were shouts of excitement from the Nazis beyond the fence. The gates were opened, and a ragged bunch of prisoners were marched back inside, all beaten and bloodied. I immediately felt sick to my stomach and swayed on my feet. The escaped prisoners hadn't made it. They had been caught. How? I didn't know. And how many had run and how many had they'd caught? I didn't know either. But these men hadn't made it, and the price would be severe. The SS officer of the watch sneered at us. There is no escape from Birkenau, he cried. No escape. Perhaps some of you are thinking about running. There is no one waiting to help you on the outside. There is nowhere for you to hide. You will be caught. And here is what we do to those who try to escape. They lined the men up against the wall and in the assembly yard. Rat-a-tat-tat-tat. The watch officer gunned them down himself, riddling their bodies with bullets. Bring forward their work detail, the guard cried. Other men were pulled out of the ranks, prisoners who had done nothing but work alongside the men who'd run, prisoners who hadn't tried to escape. Rat-a-tat-tat-tat. The SS man shot them too. Then the soldier turned the gun on us in the roll call ranks. Rat-a-tat-tat. I closed my eyes and prayed that the bullets wouldn't find me, trembling as prisoners were hit and fell dead to the ground all around me. I couldn't move, though. I couldn't run. If I flinched, I would be singled out and shot. This is the punishment for escape. All of you will share the blame. And the watch officer yelled. He shot until the machine gun ran out of bullets. Click, click, click. The SS officer threw his weapon onto the ground. Clean up this mess, he ordered, and he marched away, leaving us to carry away all of our own dead. That night, in what little sleeping time there was left, I dreamed that Eamon Goeth was chasing me with his dogs. I ran and ran and ran, but I could never quite get away. Then one of the dogs leapt and bit my left arm. I woke up screaming and holding my burning left arm. My left arm, where the Nazi had carved B-3087 into my skin. Okay. The next camp Yanek gets moved to is Auschwitz, so that'll be in part 6.